Alpha Legion, Ghost in the Machine. Information of 1,000 different locations flooded through his gene-enhanced augmented mind simultaneously, with the force of a thunderhammer, causing his nose and ears to bleed profusely. He ignored it all, unable to react while his mind was fully immersed in this virtual world of algorithms and greenwashed binary code. He was close to reaching his body's limit, close to 14 days of deep immersion in the Forge World's datasphere that had taught him much, but it had come at extreme physical and mental price. Any non-post-human would have died many times over before accomplishing a fraction of what he had achieved, but he knew he couldn't any longer. He needed to come up for air now. More than once he had been forced to defend himself from the unwanted attentions of curious tech adepts, who had registered the trace of a strange signal that did not belong on the specific part of the datasphere that they were tasked with patrolling. The unsuspecting adepts, suffering catastrophic overloads soon after when the data bombs of malicious scrap code were redirected at anyone foolish enough to get too close to the ghost and the machine. It was a common enough occurrence among the ranks of the fresher adepts to delve too far, too soon into ancient, mysterious, and extremely predatory abyssal depths of Forge World Thanatos' datasphere, in the vain hope of discovering some lost information that could elevate their positions in the eyes of their peers and betters. So sudden bouts of work-induced violent insanity were commonplace and went unremarked. The corrupt adepts simply wrote off by security forces and recycled for usable parts by uncaring overlords before being replaced by newer units, to continue the never-ending cycle of the Omnissiah. All the while, the ghost in the machine made ready to return to the world of flesh and blood, his task complete. Ghost's body convulsed violently against the confined plasteel walls of the data node. His ancient Baroque suit of turquoise power armor, made to reflect a serpentine aspect with beautifully handcrafted scales the color of jade, covering his chest and pauldrons, buckled the walls with ease, even powered down with his force that his armored form could exhort. Self-awareness came to him slowly at first, with the faint registration of noise at the edge of his consciousness, before building fully into a violent cacophony of sound, and the mind-numbing sensation of blunt trauma impacting against the enclosed sanctuary of his helmet. Without warning, the convulsing stopped, and he was suddenly awake with a jolt of panic. His hands leapt towards his face in a primitive attempt to sway away the enclosing darkness and return his sight, only for his gauntlets to scratch uselessly against the cold visage of his serpent-like faceplate. His breath came quickly in gasps that transformed into a childlike scream as his mind struggled to make sense of the enclosing darkness of his unpowered helmet. For a moment of hateful vulnerability, he was transported back to being a child, a decade old and bound in the bowels of the Delta's gene labs, awaiting the ministrations of the sadistic apothecaries who would twist him into the living weapon he was now cursed to exist as until death claimed him. However, with this vision came a realization. He was an Astartes, not a child. Power, engage, Ghost spat these words into the darkness, and the familiar hum of active power armor began to build as his generator kicked into life, as perfectly smooth as the day it had been forged, and perfectly maintained by him. The darkness was banished in an instant, and his world was brought to life in a glaring amber of eye lenses, tactical readouts, system readouts, and all manner of information, both vital and trivial, rushed by his eyes as the suit finalized its reactivation process. A cold rush of focus flooded his mind, and his heart thundered harder as a cocktail of combat stimulants shunted into his body, the machine spirit of his armor mistaking his chaotic vital signs for the vigors of war and taking steps to ensure his survival. Ghost pushed himself upright, as far as he could in the confines of his hiding spot, and took in his surroundings, his enhanced mind registering its smallest detail in an instant. Satisfied with his assessment, he reached up and unplugged the neural spike from the ports of his helmet, A feeling of relief flooded his skull as the pressure was released, and the spike instantly retracted into the storage module built in the back of his helmet, automatically ejecting itself from the data port and slithering up the floor like a snake. Satisfied, he reached up and undid the helmet seals. A vent of pressurized steam, followed by a discharge of coagulated blood, splattered down his chest, filling his environment with the scent of old blood and sour breath. He sighed to himself as he placed the helmet on the ground next to him and spat to clear his mouth, the worse the taste of blood and rancid saliva. 13 days, 20 hours, Terran Standard Time, he thought to himself, as he took a small black bottle from his webbing pouch. The longest immersion yet, and by far the worst effect on his body, he added as he opened the bottle's lid and drank deeply of the cool water within. He smiled to himself as his parched and savage throat was cooled by the water. You can say what you like about the Delta, but the ship had a damn good water filtration plant. It was pilfered Tau technology, picked up on raids and studied through the centuries until finally understood. It was tiers above anything the modern Imperium was capable of producing. Ghost smiled to himself as he thought of the cruel irony of an Astartes relishing water produced by deviant Xenos technologies while huddled in the bowels of a hostile Forge world. The galaxy had a vicious sense of humor, it seemed. Ghost grunted to himself when the last of the water left the bottle. He would be relying on his armor's water filter from this point on. Recycled piss water and whatever acid rain this world classified as drinkable water, always as a pleasant thought, he dismissed when it came to him. He couldn't be on this world much longer. He gathered up a hoard of data on the Forge world itself, from defenses, population, arms, ammunition, exports, imports, communication capabilities, and many more esoteric musings on the cult Mechanicus. All that was left was to await the signal from his brothers and exfiltrate himself to the predetermined rendezvous point. It was time to move to the next hiding spot and assess the next course of action. But most importantly, it was time to fully recover.